Bibliophiles of the internet, my name is Adriana, and last week was Booktube-A-Thon 2014. Maybe you missed it. It was a very small event, very obscure. Nobody knew about it. But you're probably thinking, oh my god, what? Adriana, you participated in the Booktube-A-Thon and you didn't let us know? Damn straight I didn't let you know. When I participate in read-a-thons, I just kind of keep to myself and do my own thing, and I keep the main goal in mind, which is to read as much as you possibly can in the allotted time frame. Last week, I was in beast mode. And I made the Booktube-A-Thon my word that I cannot say on this channel, but it starts with a B and ends with an itch. I never said that I couldn't spell it phonetically. So without further ado, let's start talking about the books that I read during the 2014 Booktube-A-Thon. These are not in chronological order, by the way, because there were some things that I read parallel to one another, but I wanted to keep series together as much as possible. So the first thing that I accomplished, yes, accomplished, over the week of the Booktube-A-Thon is I read the entire Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan. I don't really think that I need to talk about what this series is about. It's like a modern sort of retelling of Greek and Roman mythology, and it focuses on Percy and his friends who are half-bloods, which means that one of their parents is a god and one of their parents is human, and that makes them heroes, and they have to go on all of these kinds of quests and stuff. It's really good. I thought this was a super fun and imaginative series, and I really like how Rick Riordan sort of redid and recreated the Greek and Roman myths, because I mean, most of them are hella messed up. Like, it would not be okay for children to read those because they are effed up in so many ways. So I loved the new spin that he put on all this mythology. I thought it was really well incorporated, and it was just such a fun and entertaining series to read. And even though I enjoyed this series immensely, I wouldn't say that it's perfect, because I think a lot of the times the things that happen in all of the stories are kind of whirlwind, kind of very convenient. A lot of things happen just in the nick of time, which, you know, is fine, but all of these books are jam-packed with action, so that kind of stuff happens a lot. Rating-wise, I gave The Lightning Thief 3.5 stars. I gave The Sea of Monster 4 out of 5 stars. I gave The Titan's Curse 3.5 out of 5 stars. I gave The Battle of the Labyrinth 4.5 out of 5 stars, and this is probably my favorite in the series, seriously, because I've always loved the story of the Labyrinth, and I think it was incorporated so well. I love this one. I love it a lot. And I gave the fifth and final book, The Last Olympian, 4.5 out of 5 stars as well. So I read one Percy Jackson book per day from Monday to Friday, but in the evenings I was reading something else. As you may or may not know, I am the co-moderator of the Booktube Manga Club. I will leave a link to the Goodreads group in the description. And this month, one of the mangas that we're reading is Death Note by Tsugumi Oba. So before the Booktube-A-Thon, I had read the first 5 volumes of Death Note, which means I had 7 left to go. And so I set a very reasonable goal for myself to read the remaining 7 mangas, 1 volume per day, every day of the Booktube-A-Thon. And so that is what I did. I will show you the covers. On Monday, I read volume 6. On Tuesday, I read volume 7. On Wednesday, I read volume 8. On Thursday, I read volume 9. On Friday, I read volume 10. On Saturday, I read volume 11. And finally, on Sunday, the last day of the Booktube-A-Thon, I read volume 12. Death Note is kind of like a supernatural suspense thriller kind of manga. And it's about this ace student, this complete genius, Light Yagami. He comes across this notebook that's called a death note. If you write somebody's name in it, that person will die. Light decides that he's going to use this notebook to create a utopia and wipe the earth of evil. As you may imagine, this eventually draws the attention of the authorities, and from then on out, it's a strategic battle between Light and the police and the FBI and the NPA. I just have to say right off the bat that this is not one of my favorite manga series that I've read. There was something that kept me disconnected from the story, but on paper, it was great. It was insane. Everything made dramatic sense. The tension is through the roof the entire time, and the stakes are constantly set as high as they could possibly be. I guess my biggest problem with this series is, like I said, well, on paper, everything everything makes sense and it's amazing. And I definitely give credit to the creators of thinking of this, because it's just madness. But I had a difficult time with the believability of the story. Also, the representation of women in Death Note is atrocious. Overall, a satisfying series, but like I said, it was not my favorite manga series that I've ever read. Like I said, I was finished with the Percy Jackson series on Friday, early Friday morning, but I had a book that I had checked out of the library that was going to be due soon, and I didn't have any other plans, so I said to myself, you know what, I gotta try to get through this one. And that was The Evolution of Mara Dyer by Michelle Hodkin. Earlier this month, at the beginning of July, I read The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer, just on an impulse because I saw it in my library. I didn't really enjoy the first book, and we'll get to that in my July wrap-up. Like, that's a whole other Oprah, that's a different story. The thing about the Mara Dyer series is that it's good, but it's not good. I do think this series has some awesome things going on. First and foremost, an unreliable narrator. In case you didn't know, this series obviously is about a girl named Mara Dyer, and she's been through some very traumatic events. She suffers from PTSD, which means that she sees hallucinations all the time. She sees things that aren't there. She feels things that aren't real. She's having these terrible dreams and flashbacks of the traumatic event. And so there are times when she doesn't know how to differentiate between what's really happening and what's just going on in her mind, which makes her an unreliable narrator. All of the horror and the suspense elements of the novels, I think, are the best parts by far. But then there's the romance, and I hate it. The only thing is, I wouldn't have a problem with the romance if it wasn't so cliched and if it didn't so strongly detract from Mara's actual story. There are some really great moments in the writing. Like, one of the fantastic details in The Evolution of Mara Dyer is that one of the characters says, "There's no such thing as truth, only perspectives." And that really makes you think. But then, like, a couple of chapters later, Mara will describe Noah as looking like sex. That is a direct quote. All in all, I thought The Evolution of Mara Dyer was a really good improvement to the series. I liked it a lot more than the first book, but I still ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. So that book was like 530 pages, and you would think that I would be done by then, but I wasn't. I thought I would pick up a light contemporary, something that I could fly through, something that was very different, a very different mood from the other things that I had been reading. I know that the contemporary lovers for July chose this book, and I saw that my library had it, so I checked it out. And that is Amy and Roger's Epic Detour by Morgan Matson. And the story is about a girl named Amy who has suffered through some unfortunate events recently in her life, and as a result of that, her entire family is moving from California to Connecticut. So the deal is that she has to transport her mother's car from California to Connecticut, but she doesn't really like to drive. Conveniently, Amy's mother knows a friend of the family who also has to make the trip cross country, and so that's how Roger comes into the picture. He is the driver. This was such an unbelievably cute and fun and amazing book. It is definitely the feel-good book that you would expect it to be with the road trip, but at the same time it has a lot of heart, because I think both of these characters are working through difficult times in their life. So not only is it a physical journey as they transport themselves across America, but it's an emotional journey as well. I'm sure you all know that this book also has like drawings and photos and receipts and postcards and playlists. And as I was reading this book, I was listening to the playlists that these characters had compiled, which they're like available on 8 tracks if you just give it a search. I highly recommend doing that because the playlists are an amazing soundtrack to the story. Overall, this was such a fun read, and I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I highly recommend it if you have not read this story already. When I was checking out Amy and Roger's Epic Detour, I was just browsing the shelves, and I saw that my library had this next book in stock, and there was just something that drew me to it. Something told me I couldn't leave the library without that book, and I don't want to keep you in suspense any longer, so that is Last Night I Sang to the Monster by Benjamin Alirez Sáenz. It's about a guy named Zach who is an alcoholic. He doesn't know how and he doesn't know why, but somehow he has ended up in a rehab facility center. So this story chronicles the time that he spent in rehab and his emotional journey of finally facing the trauma that sent him to rehab. Obligatory trigger warning, this story does deal with some very heavy stuff like depression, obviously alcoholism, sometimes self-harm, abuse, rape, things like that. It was difficult to read because it's basically a manifesto on pain from page 1 until the end, but this author's writing just strikes a chord with me. It just does. It's not going to be to everybody's liking, and I understand that, but there's just something about his words, and he understands pain and he understands suffering on a visceral level. And even though maybe not everybody has gone through the things that this main character has gone through, like I've never been an alcoholic, I've never gone to rehab, and I've never been through half of the things that he's been through, but this author makes the pain, the underlying pain and self-loathing and all of the demons that we carry, he makes that universal. And like I said, the writing style, not only of this book, but of Aristotle and Dante, is not going to be to everybody's liking because this author really does use very concise, short sentences, sometimes fragments, and that structure of the story kind of makes the narration seem aggressive at times. And there are phrases that the narrator will repeat again and again, but I just think the way all those elements come together creates something that's so relatable and so real and so undeniable and powerful. Do I think it's perfect? Do I think everybody is going to love it? Do I think this story is for everyone? Absolutely not. In the end, I gave this book 4.5 out of 5 stars. So if you've been keeping a tally, I read 15 books over the course of Booktube-A-Thon 2014. Yeah, after 7 days of reading for the Booktube-A-Thon, my final page count was 4,245 pages. I don't know. In a nutshell, it was a pretty good reading week. So let me know how you did during the Booktube-A-Thon. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about the things that I was reading. Sorry if it's a little bit too long-winded, but I have feels and thoughts. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you very, very much for watching, and I will catch you on the flip side of the page. Bye.